with just a passage of Scripture. And actually, I shared this at our staff retreat yesterday, but I want to frame it. We've called this seminar tonight, Nurturing Your Soul with Monastic Wisdom. And if you've been coming to New Life for any amount of time, you know that the word monastic is really important to us as a church family. It's actually one of our 5 values, one of our 5 M's. We have monastic, we're multiracial. The third it starts with an E, but you just capitalize the M, emotionally healthy, marriage to Christ, and missional. And monastic simply means, in our context here, slowing down to be with God in community. Slowing down to be with God in community. And this is such an important value, and we begin our discipleship with this monastic because our city is tired. Our city is exhausted. Our city has no rhythm whatsoever. Not just our city, the entire world lacks a rhythm. And so the monastic, which really flows out of the monastic tradition of monks and what have you, really is about anchoring our lives in God, anchoring our lives in prayer, anchoring our lives in rhythm. And so we're going to be looking at that tonight, and Dr. Wil Hernandez is going to lead us in that. But what I want to do is I want to just frame our day, because there's a passage that I think anchors us and what Jesus wants to do in us tonight. And the passage comes out of Matthew 11. It's a very familiar passage of Scripture where we hear Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, heavy laden, I will give you rest." But there's a translation that I love from a scholar. His name is Dale Bruner. And this is his translation of it. And before I pray for us and invite Will up here, I want you to hear these words. And so this is Jesus speaking to you tonight, right at this moment at 6:47 p.m. This is what he's saying to you. He's saying these words: "Come here to me, all of you who are struggling and carrying too much, and I will refresh you. Here, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am gentle and simple at heart. You will experience refreshing deep down in your souls. You see, my yoke is easy to wear, and my burden is light to carry." And just a couple of words stand out to me as we begin our time here. First, Jesus says, "Come to me," which basically Jesus is assuming that we are not there with him already, that we're somewhere else. And the invitation every single day and every single hour is Jesus saying, "Come here to me," because our hearts wander very quickly. And we're with him, and then an hour goes by, and we're wandering again. And Jesus has to tell us again, "Come here to me." And that's the invitation of Jesus, coming here to him. And so we need that invitation every single day, every single hour. And then he says, "Come here to me, all of you who are struggling and carrying too much." Now, I don't have to have a deep conversation with you to know that many of us in this room are carrying too much. And the loads that we carry are not just external. We have external loads that we carry, work, home, friendship, all the external stuff. But the deeper loads that we carry that Jesus wants to give us refreshment from are the internal loads that we carry. The internal burdens that we carry, our guilt, our shame, our perfectionism, our performance-driven life, our striving, our failures. And Jesus says, if you're struggling and carrying too much, and he says, "I will refresh you." And Jesus wants to refresh us tonight. He wants to give us really an impartation of his life to refresh us. And some of you, I know, are exhausted. Long day of work, what you need is some refreshing. And the presence of God, Jesus wants to refresh you. And then he says these words, ironically, "Take my yoke upon you." And a yoke is a wooden cross piece that is fastened into the necks of 2 animals. And they're to pull together. And what's ironic is a yoke is an instrument of work. And so Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you." And it's a work. First he says, "I'm going to refresh you." Then he says, "I want you to work." But it's just like, really, Jesus, what you should be saying is, "I will give you a vacation. Take my vacation upon you. Take my mattress upon you. Take a massage upon you." And yet Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you." And what's interesting is Dale Bruner says these words. He says, Jesus realizes the most restful gift he can give the tired is a new way to carry life, a fresh way to bear their responsibilities. We cannot escape our burdens, but we can be equipped for them. And so this is what Jesus gives us in this passage. He gives us refreshment, and he gives us equipment. He refreshes our souls, and Jesus wants to refresh your souls tonight. But he also equips us to say there's a whole new way of living in the world. And typically when we get burdened, we want to take off something. We say, what can I take off? And the first question when burdens come our way is not, what can I take off? The first question is, what can I take on? Have I taken on his yoke? As opposed to, have I taken off something else? And so today is an opportunity for us to take on the yoke of Jesus, to be shaped by him, that when life gets crazy and life gets burdensome, that we take on his yoke. And so this is what tonight is about. Tonight is about really taking on the yoke of Jesus, about centering our lives in his love, and out of that place, living in a centered, intentional way where we are living in his kingdom, we're living in his love, we are experiencing union with him. And so it's to that end that I want to introduce Dr. Wil Hernandez. And really serendipitously, Wil came to us. There was another spiritual formation person, director, wonderful teacher that was slated to be here. I went to a retreat last year, and she couldn't make it because there was a death in her family. Her husband passed away tragically. And so I called Wil 2 years ago. And he's a big scholar in the field of Henry Nouwen spirituality and Benedictine spirituality. And he said he was going to be doing a retreat in Long Island a couple of years ago. I called him. I tracked his number. I stalked him. I called him, found out his home number or something. I just said, wait, where is it at? And he said, I would love for you to come. I couldn't make it. But I never forgot Wil, and I'm part of his mailing list. And so he emailed me one day as I'm thinking, who can I invite to come? And he emailed me. I said, of course. Wil, can we fly you out here to come? I know our community would really be blessed by you. And he said, well, what's the week? And I said, it's this week in September. And he said, well, I'm going to be in Long Island that week. And so I would love to do it. And so it was like God just orchestrating. And I don't believe in coincidences either. And you've mentioned that on our staff retreat yesterday. The providence of God really, I believe, has orchestrated this night. And he was visiting some family, and it worked out where he can come tonight. And so I am thrilled that we are going to really benefit and sit under his teaching tonight as it pertains to what we've been talking about at New Life, creating a rule of life, and what the work that needs to be done before that. And so Dr. Wil he's out in California right now. He has what's called a Center Quest, which is, he'll talk about that in a moment, towards the end of our time. He teaches at Fuller Seminary as well. He's just spiritual direction and all of that. But he is just a wonderful man of God who I've been personally blessed by. And yesterday was a real gift to our staff. And so, when we welcome someone at New Life, we really give them everything we got. We really make them feel at home. And so as Wil comes up to the platform here, let's give him the biggest welcome that we can. Join me in welcoming Dr. Wil Hernandez.
Good evening. Is it working? All right. Rich said I come from California. I've been there for like the last 15 years now. I actually originally came from the Philippines and then went to Texas and stayed there for 4 years. And then I moved my family from Texas to California, and we've been there for the last 15 years. I was making a joke yesterday that I used to belong to an organization that prided itself for calling the organization not an organization but a movement, because we always have a moving experience. And I was telling them that I lost count how many times I've moved throughout my entire life, but it's been great the last 15 years in California. I always say that in California, in Southern California, where I reside, we have a perfect weather, And lo and behold, I came here and it's much cooler here in New York, because I heard that the heat has been so oppressive the last several days in Southern California, like 100 plus and all that. And so we live in an apartment where the moment the temperature hits like 90, the old air conditioning unit just can't hack it. So I'm I was just trying to imagine what it must be like for my wife and my two boys. They're suffering right now. No, I'm kidding. But no, I was actually surprised that the weather here is much cooler than I had anticipated. It's good to be here. Like Rich said, I was with the staff team yesterday. It was just fun and enjoyable. We had a fruitful time together. I hope that it has proven to be beneficial. But I've enjoyed it, at least from my end. And I hope that tonight would be equally beneficial for those of you who have come all the way to be with us. My first spiritual director, when I moved to California, was a Benedictine monk. But he's a very unusual Benedictine monk. He's a bioethicist, a graduate of the University of Southern California. And he's a harpist. I mean, he plays this huge harp. So when I would go to the monastery, it's like, it sounds heavenly to, when the monks like chant the Psalms and he plays the harp in the background. And he's a scholar. He graduated from Oxford. He's got like 2 degrees and all that. So he teaches in different places, different universities and seminaries and all that. So he's probably one of the busiest monks that I've ever met. So much so that somebody, I wasn't the one, but somebody labeled him a turbo monk, because it's like, wow, you would imagine that a monk is, the typical, stereotypical contemplative person, but he's really a bundle of energy. Now, I'm saying that because, well, I've been under him for like 5-6 years, and I probably imbibed the turbo part of it. And so I'm like warning you in advance. Behold, I warn you in advance. So if you have your seatbelts with you, you might as well fasten it for the next what? I believe that we're going to be here for 5 hours, right? Oh, it's not true. But I just want to make sure that you have your seatbelts securely fastened, and so that you can concentrate and focus. I'm just kidding, of course. But hey, if I may, just before I plunge into our thing tonight, if I may plug in something right from the get-go, Rich conveniently left out the fact that I graduated with a degree in visual communications, which is really a glorified title for like advertising design. So I always advertise something wherever I go. Now, I was surprised to see my books there, and I was like hoping that Rich would make available like a handful of books, like 10 books or 15 books and all that. I wrote a trilogy on Henry Nouwen, which was really my dissertation, and I was telling Susan, I said, oh my gosh, why all these books? Who's gonna buy them? So I'm pleading, I'm gonna be so embarrassed if none of you will ever even buy one. No, I'm kidding. But there's this book that's on display is really the third in the trilogy, and quite frankly, when you're a new author, you're at the mercy of your publisher. So, they just massively edit just about anything under the sun, including my name. My real name is Willie, and they edited it to Will, which I like, But the third book is really, I would say, my personal favorite because it came out. See, when I first published my book in 2006, it was like Nouwen was coming out of my ears, straight out of my dissertation work. But the third book came out of 8 years of doing courses and classes and seminars and retreats. It was inspired by the work of Richard Rohr and his concept of non-dualistic thinking, which I applied to Nouwen's concept of spiritual polarities, a life of tension. So you may want to check that out. But also there are some flyers there about Center Quest, which is the organization that I founded. And we're launching a school of spiritual direction, and we're offering some online classes and all that you may want to check out. Towards the end, we're going to be playing like a very short video that will give you an idea of the organization that was really inspired by the legacy, the spiritual legacy of Henry Nouwen. So much for that little plug. But once again, thank you so much for having me here. Not that you had any choice whatsoever, but I really am glad to be here in New York at this point in time. It was really, like Rich has mentioned, it was so providential because I really was trying to catch my brother and my sister-in-law who are vacationing here in Long Island, just to see them and spend some time with them for a few days just before they head back to Manila. So it all worked out so well. Before I begin, if you don't mind, maybe we'll just have a short guided meditation, if that's okay with you, just to kind of like settle us down and focus our attention, ground ourselves before God. And so if I may invite you to just sit comfortably where you're at, whatever feels comfortable for you, and maybe you can gently and slowly just close your eyes. And I don't know where you're coming from in terms of your stage in life, your journey at the moment, but wherever you're coming from, I would invite you to spiritually arrive in this place at this very moment with this gathered community. And just make a choice to be present in the moment, right here, present to who you are in God, present to one another and with one another, this gathered community, and then above all, most importantly, present to the God who is ever present to us. Hear God say to you, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Oh God, thank you for gathering us tonight. Open our hearts, our minds to what you would have for us. May we be attentive to you, to one another, but also to ourselves, just paying attention to what's going on inside of us, what's going on around us. And I pray, oh Lord, that we will be receptive to you first and foremost. And just to learn whatever it is, Lord, that you have in store for us. And so we want to entrust the remaining time we have left together. May we be enriched. May we be blessed. In your name we pray. Amen. I think I take back my word that it's cooler here in New York because I'm feeling hot. But well, let's get started right here. I was given this topic, nurturing your soul with monastic wisdom. And what I'd like to do, as before we really delve into this particular topic, is I want to spend the next few minutes just to put things in perspective. I'm kind of like a big picture guy. I want us to have a kind of like a roadmap of where we're going, but also to situate clearly where we're going, and also just to have our mindset focused on the one particular thrust that we're aiming at. So I'd like to put things in perspective, and I'd like to begin by talking about spiritual leadership. Now, I am assuming that you guys are all in one way or another, serving in some leadership capacity. And even though you may not have what you would call a formal official role, as we minister, as we serve the church, the body, we're really leaders, whether you like it or not. Because we're responsible for other people that follow us, other people that God has chosen to entrust to us. So I want to talk about this whole concept of spiritual leadership, but I'd like to begin with a very foundational, very basic definition of what a leader is that most of you may be even familiar with. Let me define leadership this way, or at least a leader. A leader, first of all, is a person. Duh. But yes, the leader is got to be a person. But there is a rhyme and a reason why I want to underline the personhood or the being of a leader. A leader is a person involved in the process. The process of what? Influencing people to accomplish a purpose. Now, right there, you'll see the 4 P's of leadership. What are they? Person, process, people, and purpose. And let me illustrate this by giving you kind of like a very simple diagram of the trilogy of leadership. Okay? First of all, a leader is what? A person involved in the process of motivating, influencing people towards a particular purpose. When I speak about the person of the leader, I'm actually highlighting the fact that we're really addressing personal development. But even when I use the word personal development, I'm not just narrowing it down to quote-unquote personal, but it encompasses a more holistic sense by which it includes spiritual, emotional, intellectual, all of this that makes a person a person. Does that make sense? So, the person of leadership has to do with the personal development, but also when we speak of the people that the leader is influencing, we're actually referring to motivational skills involved. When you influence somebody, you have to have some capacity to lead people, right? And motivate them to do a certain thing, which has to do with a purpose. Oops. And that has to do with decision-making task. Are we okay? All right. So, what I want to highlight though, and this thing is about to fall off. No, that's okay. That's okay. I think that's okay. Okay, what I want to highlight by focusing our attention to the 3 Ps, the trilogy of leadership dynamics here, is the fact that there is a correlation between leadership and spirituality. Okay? Leadership flows out of the depth of one's soul. So you cannot separate the person of the leader, the being, from what a leader does. Okay? Which is, quote unquote, leadership. So leadership and spirituality intertwine or intersect. Leaders who are spiritual can separate their souls from leading. By the way, do you believe that we are all spiritual beings? Homo sapiens, as one theologian puts it, Homo sapiens are Homo spiritualis by virtue of the imago Dei, by virtue of the fact that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. That's what makes us spiritual, which means whether you're an atheist, a non-believer, or a believer, it doesn't even matter. All of us, what? Possess what the ancient monks and mystics called the divine spark inside of us, which is the image of God. That makes our soul spiritual. So we are spiritual beings. The Jesuit by the name of Teilhard de Chardin puts it this way: we're really not human beings having a spiritual experience, but we are really first and foremost spiritual beings having a human experience and a human journey. So I'd like you to keep that in mind, because some people say, well, my spiritual odyssey or journey actually started when I came to know the Lord. Well, that's not necessarily true. Our journey started the moment we came out here in this earth, because we really bear the very image of God. Even though that image, of course, has been marred, we're still our image bearers, except that we have become what? Fallen image bearers, who can no longer perfectly image God, just like how it was, originally intended. Okay? But nonetheless, we do bear the image of God, and we image God, however imperfectly. So, leaders who are spiritual can separate their souls from leading. That is to say that it almost goes without saying, that there is a need to strengthen the soul of the leader. Because true leading is leading from who you are. Does that make sense? How else do we minister? How else can we lead but out of who we genuinely are? Of course, the multi-million-dollar question is, who are you? Do you lead out of your many false selves that you have spent a lifetime constructing, reconstructing, choreographing elaborately? I pluralized it because it really is plural. We have constructed our many false selves, so much so that what? We get all mixed up, that we think that we really are that person, when in reality, we have just become somebody we're really not. The question, of course, is, do leaders really lead out of their authentic self? Meaning what? Out of our original, true self. Now, that's a whole different arena to deal with, but suffice it to say, just for our purposes right now, I think that it's very important for us to understand that as leaders, as ministers, we have to bear in mind, how am I leading? Am I leading out of the truest core of who I am in God? Or am I leading out of the energy of the flesh, which is expressed through my many false selves? Okay? So, that's why, folks, there really is no way that you can separate spiritual formation and leadership development. The first organization I joined, as soon as I graduated from Fuller, was really called the Leadership Institute. And their thrust really is integrating spiritual formation with leadership development. And that's what ought to happen. We are being formed. The question, of course, is how are we being formed? But true spiritual formation goes side by side with our formation as a minister, as a leader. And having said that, there's also a need for us as ministers, as leaders, and I'm just like using those words kind of interchangeably. There's a need for us to form spiritual habits of the heart. That's actually a way to cushion another phrase that evokes resistance for many of us. You know what that phrase is? Spiritual disciplines. Okay? Because we don't like the word discipline for some reason. But I kind of like this. You know, the need for us to cultivate spiritual habits of the heart so that the integration of our formation and leadership development becomes more and more what? Coherent or congruent. That's why I like the topic, because it focuses on where I want it really nailed down to, which is what? Our soul. The soul of a minister, the soul of a leader. So how do we nurture our soul? Yesterday, I quoted from one of my favorite authors, which I'm sure you probably are familiar with. Are you familiar with Eugene Peterson? Of course, huh? Because he authored the famous Message Bible. Well, he's authored many books. He really, truly is one of my favorite authors. But quite frankly, I really believe, and I'm thoroughly convinced, that the best book he's ever written is entitled Under the Unpredictable Plant. Now, that clues you in that the subject matter has to do with what? The story of Jonah. You know, who hid under the what? The unpredictable plant. And the whole book really has to do with exploring vocational holiness. How do we integrate personal and vocational holiness in our lives? Now, I'm not going to tell you what the book is all about, but I'm going to tell you the thesis of the book that has really impacted me the most. Because it sort of like mirrored the very story of my own life for many years as somebody who devoted my whole life serving God with all my might. Eugene Peterson said this: most ministers, and ministries too, do not have what it takes to fund their ministry undertaking for the long haul. Did you get that? Most ministers, you and I included, most of us, and he's of course making a sweeping generality here, most ministers sadly, do not have what it takes to fund their ministry undertaking for the long haul. Meaning what? Most ministers, sooner or later, burn out or fold up, and ministries close down, and people get wiped out, and pretty soon they've evaporated from the ministry scene. You know why? Because most ministers run out of gas. You know why they run out of gas? Because according to Peterson, most ministers do not have a spiritual capital. In other words, he says, most of us do not have an interior spirituality that can adequately meet the external demands of ministry. We launch into a ministry, we are over eager and zealous to serve God without realizing that, do I have what it takes to actually make it for the long range? Or am I going to run out of gas next year or 3 years from now just because why? I discover, much to my shame, that what? Something is hollow deep down inside. I don't have an interior spirituality that can sustain it. Does that make sense? And that's sad. But you know what? Like I said, that's the story of my life. I was telling my little story to the group yesterday that at a very young age of 19, well, in the Philippines, you graduate from college at 19 years old. And I was one of those people, the Swiss psychologist, remember his famous quote, the young people are always looking for a flag to wave and a song to sing and a creed to follow. And so I joined an organization that wanted to change the world, and I wanted to change the world. And at 19 years old, I told my parents, I'm going to serve God full time. And for 18 long years, I did. And my whole life revolved around this organization that became for me the sun, where my whole life just orbited, you know? And I was very sincere. I really wanted so badly to really give of my life to God. I was very sincere, but I was sincerely wrong, because I didn't realize that, I was really drawing my own significance to my function, my roles, the ministry hats, I was wearing and all that. And then pretty soon I was really literally running out of gas. My wife practically almost gave up on me, because at first she was joking, which I never paid attention to, but she was she was telling her friends that, you know what, I'm losing my husband for God. He is carrying an extramarital affair with this ministry. But I was very proud about my involvement. After all, I felt so justified about what I was doing, since I was what? Serving God, right? One day I recalled so vividly, I came home very tired, with nothing much left in terms of energy to deal with my domestic life and my kids and all that. And my wife, with a sad tone of resignation, said, how come you have so much energy when it comes to ministry, but when you come home you get the crumbs? Well, you know what I said, how I responded to my wife? I said to her, well, don't you realize this is part and parcel of God's calling for us? Some things have got to go. And really, in retrospect, I look back and I go, I said those words, some things have got to go, translated as what? Well, my family is the first to go, in favor of God, Because when I was in the ministry, I felt respected. I felt I was in control. I knew what I was doing. I was in charge. When I came home, I didn't know what to do with my kids. I didn't know how to run my family. And it was always messy, and I hated mess. I like an orderly, tidy existence, And I found it in ministry. Ministry became to me my manageable garden with less thistles, thorns, and weeds. And my domestic life, I hated it. That's why I got drawn away from home in favor of ministry. But you know what? I realized, my gosh, my story was not an isolated case. I'm one of the many who are so eager to serve God, but I didn't have what it took to really fund my ministry undertaking for the long haul. I did burn out, by the way. And by the grace of God, of course, to cut a long story short, by the grace of God, my eyes were open. Even though the blindness was so pervasive, it's like my eyes were open and I go, what have I become? What did I do with my life? And that's when I resigned from the organization I've served for 18 long years, and I said, I'm going to start a new life with my family. That's when we went to the States. I went to the States when I was 36 years old? That's why you can tell that I have a peculiar accent, by the way. Unlike my two boys, Jonathan and David, who are not necessarily the best of friends, by the way, who pretty much grew up in Texas, and they both used to correct my pronunciation, one day I remember I stepped on my 4-year-old son's Batman toy, and I said, David, what's this Batman toy doing here? And my son says, Dad, you don't call it Batman, it's Batman. And I said, I don't care whether it's Catwoman. Just get it out of my way. And you know how these kids are, huh? They now correct your pronunciation. I said, sorry guys, I can't retrain my tongue anymore. It's too late. But anyway, I'm just entertaining you a little bit. So Are you still fastened well? Okay, while I'm perspiring here. My point really is this. It may sound so simple, but folks, what are we doing with our soul? How are we nurturing our inner life, our being? That's the point that I'm driving out here, because that's what salvaged me when I began, looking inside or interiorly, because my whole life was so externalized. Everything was about what I did, but I never really paid attention to what's going on in my heart, in my soul. You can tell that my theological bias is Augustinian in the sense that I use the word soul, heart, and self interchangeably and synonymously, just like Augustine did. But anyway, let's move on. Maybe I'll skip this. Yeah, I'll skip this. I'll just say that. Are you familiar with Abbey of the Arts, by the way? Have you ever seen that? Well, there's this online thing that was founded by. She calls herself the abbess of the online thing. It's called Abbey of the Arts, and she's doing some tremendous work. But she's a Benedictine oblate, just like I am. An oblate, by the way, is kind of like an affiliate or an associate of a particular monastery. You live by the rule of Saint Benedict, but you live your life like, your usual life. You're not a monk or anything, but you abide by the principles of Benedictine spirituality, which I'm going to expound a little bit later on. But this lady, her name is Christine, invited me to be a guest blogger for her site, and the topic was how to be a monk in the world. And I'll try to give you a Reader's Digest version of what I wrote in there, because on the March 22, the feast of Saint Benedict, that's when I decided that I would do my final oblation. Final oblation meaning I was going to make my vows after having been a novitiate for 1 year as a Protestant. The monastery, by the way, has more than 600 oblates. More than half of them are actually Protestants, including evangelicals and Lutherans and Episcopalians and what have you. So it's a very unique Benedictine monastery. But anyway, on the Feast of Saint Benedict, March 22, there are two feasts of Saint Benedict. This is I think the birth or the death. Anyway, I sort of timed it there because I know the monks. They know how to feast. When it's a feast day of a saint, they have 5 Marie calendars dessert and all kinds of nice food and all that. But anyway, when they ask me, what is your saint's name? Because you have to adopt an oblate's name, pattern after a saint. And without blinking an eye, I said, John of the Cross. You know why? I don't know. It's probably the Filipino in me. I said, Juan de la Cruz, every Filipino is Juan de la Cruz. So I said, John of the Cross. But I like John of the Cross. He's a Spanish mystic poet. And of course, he wrote the famous what? The Dark Night of the Soul, right? Little did I know that 2 months after I made that oblation, I would enter the darkest episode of my life that would have lasted more than a year or so. And I regretted and relented why, in the first place, I chose Juan de la Cruz as my oblate name, because sometimes God has a sense of, I would say humor, but I would say a sense of rumor. But, but kidding aside, I was really plunged into a situation where I really didn't quite expect. I had a new job at the time. I was the golden boy of the university, and I had to prove myself. And before I knew it, I kind of I saw myself reliving my old life without being aware of it. My obsessiveness, my perfectionistic tendencies, my drivenness, etc., etc. And I wanted to prove to one and all that they never made a mistake hiring me. I was a chair in spiritual formation. I was advanced just like that in terms of, tenure and credential and everything and all that. And so the pressure was on. I'm telling you this story because I didn't realize that you think that you've conquered it all, you've overcome it and all that. And that's why, by the way, I'm all out for Benedictine spirituality. You know the motto or the mantra of Benedictine spirituality? Always we begin again. Always we begin again. The monks will always tell you, we fall down and we get up. And we fall down and we get up. But anyway, unbeknownst to me, my old tendencies, which were still flowing through my veins, much to my horror, I really was so distracted. And the bottom line of it all really was the fact that I became unglued or so ungrounded that my energy was spilling all over the place. And I know that people knew that I was becoming very decentered. That I was not taking care of my own soul anymore, but rather I was more preoccupied with what I can deliver, what I can perform, what I can do, and what I can prove. And but anyway, I came out of that, of course, but it was a very painful experience. But it was a very cleansing experience too, just like any kind of dark night episode that any one of us can go through. It's a purging experience. I came out of it. I call it the terrible beauty of transformation. Because transformation doesn't always come beautifully or in a delightful kind of way, but sometimes God does allow us to really fall flat on our face for us to really learn and to really be changed from the inside out most deeply. I'm telling you all this too because I told you how ungrounded I've become, and I realized that there's one aspect in our lives as leaders, as ministers, that we should always keep in mind, and that is that we sustain a particular rhythm of life that will, quote unquote, not ensure literally, but at least will put us on that space of grace where God can really work unhindered in our lives. So I'm going to talk about cultivating our rhythm of life. Believe it or not, but we do have rhythms. Okay? You guys, you and I know that, when do we brush our teeth and how we brush our teeth and what do we do and when we take a shower, we follow a certain rhythm. It's just that sometimes we just don't pay attention to it, and even in the realm of, in the spiritual realm, we do follow a certain rhythm. We just have to be more deliberate and intentional about the rhythms that would really, in a sense, hasten or help us or reinforce our spiritual habits. So, and I'm going to narrow it down with this whole concept of rule of life, which I, of course, discovered is something that you all are familiar with. I mean, just one click on your website and the rule of life, and everybody knows about the rule of life and all that. But I'm going to give it a little bit of a different spin, hopefully, and you can incorporate all that you know about the rule of life, but I'm going to add a monastic flavor to it, but particularly the Benedictine flavor to crafting a rule of life, developing a rhythm of spiritual practices. By definition, let me give you a working definition of a rule of life. Very simple. It's a pattern of spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices, if you will, that provides structure and direction for our growth in holiness. And let me highlight three things there, okay? Three key words. Pattern. A rule of life has to have a pattern, which of course connotes what? A level of constancy and consistency. It has to have structure, okay? Has to have a flow and structure, but also a thrust and direction. So pattern, structure, and direction. And the best metaphor of a rule is really that of a trellis. In fact, that's what rule is, regula. is a trellis. You all know what a trellis is, right? In fact, that's how it looks like, a trellis. One of my mentorees before actually did this little graphic for me, which was used for my second book, Henry Nouwen and Soul Care. I love this because it does picture that we need that kind of a structure in our lives to sustain a more robust spiritual life. Now, what are the characteristics of an effective trellis? I'm just going to walk through with you real quickly some of this that may seem obvious to you, but would be a good refresher too. What are some of the characteristics of an effective trellis? First, it's got to be personal. I told the folks yesterday that whatever practice we adopt in our spiritual life, we don't copy it from somebody else. You know why? You're such a unique person. There's only one like you. There's no carbon copy of you, which means what? You're wired differently, your bents, your proclivities, everything is just uniquely you. So it's an exercise in futility for you to kind of borrow somebody else's way of doing things. Even your rule of life, you don't just copy. Oh, that's nice. I Googled the rule of life and it sounds great, and I will just download it and I'll make it mine. In this day and age, when everything is downloadable, nothing is fresh anymore. You know why? And most people in our congregation settle for what? Stale bread. They just download a sermon from the internet, and then they make it their own sermon. So the poor congregation are eating stale bread, not fresh anymore, because it comes out of a second hand. And we don't want our rule of life to be something like that. It's got to be highly personalized, meaning what? It flows out of what? Our own uniqueness, our own personality, our own needs, our own giftedness. Secondly, it's got to be balanced. Folks, when I use the word balance, I'm using it loosely, okay? Because it really is an illusion to think that we can achieve perfect balance. It's non-existent. But what we're saying when we say balance is that what? We are careful not to be swinging on the extreme side of the pendulum. Does that make sense? You know, I hear people who use hierarchy, it's like God first, and then family, and then ministry, and all that stuff. Folks, if you're honest enough to admit it, it doesn't work. Because God is not God there, and God is in your family, in your ministry, and everything, right? So you look at priorities as something elastic, like a rubber band. Because sometimes your ministry is your family. Sometimes you spend more time in the ministry, and sometimes all those differences, and there ought not to be any tinge of guilt whatsoever when those things happen. What we need to be cautious about is when we become imbalanced, that is so lopsided, that we fall off on the one extreme side of the other. That's what I mean when I use the word balance, lest you over-idealize it. Okay? Thirdly, it's got to be realistic. It's got to be doable, folks. Don't be overly ambitious to write 60 pages of a rule of life that is good on paper, that you can frame, but you never do anything with it. Okay? So it's got to be realistic enough for you to really employ it and use it and enjoy it. And lastly, it's got to be flexible. That's what I like about the whole trellis idea. It's pliable, it's flexible. You don't want a rigid rule of life. In fact, you evolve as a person, don't you? Well, then, your rule of life is not engraved in stone. Your rule of life has to change and has to adjust and all that. In fact, yearly, you should review your rule of life. And you should see, does this still work? Does this make sense? Maybe I should tweak it. Maybe I should readjust it and do all those kinds of things. So personal, balanced, realistic, and flexible. So how do you craft a trellis, which I would call a wisdom trellis? Okay? Now, before we get into, I know that you're already eager to hear me say, oh, come on, Will, give it away. Give me the code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of crafting a wisdom trellis. I hate to disappoint you because, first of all, I want you to confront certain realities that I want you to embrace, okay, before you craft your wisdom trellis. First of all, I want you to confront the reality, and I know that you know this deep down inside. I'm just giving you the language for it. I want you to confront the reality that all of us, am I covering it? All of us live with a certain gap or a disconnect in our lives. What kind of disconnect do we suffer from? It's a disconnect between what we say we believe and how we actually live out what we profess. Don't you agree? All of us, until our dying breath, will wrestle with such a gap that some people call the gap between our formal theology and our functional theology, or our professed or espoused theology and actually our operational theology. And more often than not, we give ourselves away when our backs are against the wall. What we truly believe comes out, or what we don't really believe, and all that. But most of us would agree we all wrestle and struggle with a disconnect between our profession and the expression of such profession. Do you agree? And that's something that we need to really confront. The other thing is this. The other thing that we need to confront is we really are lopsided people by default. And we need to reclaim our center. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, let me acquaint you with another reality that I'm sure you all can identify with. It's very pronounced, especially amongst Protestant evangelicals. We are good at knowing. In other words, we like information, content, data more than we can chew. We like the latest seminars and the latest books and the latest workshops. We're, of all generations, we're the overly seminarized, overly conferenced people because we want to accumulate more knowledge, more information, more data. We like knowing. We value information a lot. But also, you know what? Most of us are human doings, not human beings. We like to do and perform and deliver, etc., etc. So we're good at skills and all that. But you know what? More often than not, and Henry Nouwen is right about this when he made a charge towards, to evangelicals. By the way, Henry Nouwen is a friend of evangelicals. I have an article, which sounds a little corny, by the way, because it says, what a friend we have in Henry. Duh. Only evangelicals can invent that. Another book that evangelicals wrote about Henry is entitled Now and Then. I said, what? Now and then. But anyway, Nouwen says, well, evangelicals, well, they're good and what they really truly believe and articulating that they're good in terms of witnessing and serving God and all that. But the mystical life is sorely and woefully missing the being part. So we're good at the knowing, we're good at the doing, but somehow what? Lacking in the emphasis on the being. The soul is missing, right? The inner life is missing. So we need to reclaim our center. Another way of looking at it is how we sort of like fragment or sort of like split off our belief, our emotions or feelings and action. In other words, we like right thinking and right belief. We like right behavior and action, but more often than not, again, we're short on the right affect or emotion, the right heart. Cardia. Right? We're all Wesleyans right now. No, I'm kidding. But right thinking and belief, right affection and emotion, right behavior and action ought to be what? Integrated together. And there's a term for that we use when we combine the head, the heart, and the hands. The technological term that's been coined by many is this. Orthodoxy has to do with reliable beliefs. Now, orthodoxy literally means doxa is glory, right praise, right glory. But of course, it's evolved and mutated into right creed, right belief system. So we need reliable beliefs. That's important. But we need also orthopathy, godly affections, an emphasis on the heart. But all in the same way that we need orthopraxy, which is obedient action. So we have a tendency to fragment this and isolate one from the other. But in reality, what? We need to weld them together. The head, the heart, and the hands. And I will put this in this diagram. The knowing, the being, and the doing ought to be what? Put together. They're indivisible. The head, the heart, and the hand. The belief, feeling, and action, of course, the term we use. We have to strike a balance between our orthodoxy, our orthopathy, and orthopraxy. Interestingly, if you look at the Great Commandment, the love commandment is really what? A call to integrity. We are to be people of integrity who love God with what? The entirety or the integrity of our being. We don't just love God with our mind. We don't just love God with our emotions or heart or our soul, but we love God with our strength. So, tripolar spirituality, loving God, loving others, loving ourselves, it does involve the mind, the heart, and strength. Richard Rohr, one of my favorite Franciscan authors, says, "We do not see things as they are, but we see things as we are." We do not see things as they are. We actually see things. Right there, okay. We see things as we are. That's why we have to, again, focus our attention. Who are we? And who are we becoming? Are we doing enough soul work? Because soul work is about spiritual becoming. It pertains to our inner life. So now, the question of crafting a wisdom trellis. Before we take a break. Do we take a break now? Okay, quickly. I'll do a little marathon thing here. I talked about this yesterday to the folks at the retreat, but I'm going to give you kind of like a synopsis of how this is very important as a foundational kind of some basic preliminaries as we start crafting our wisdom trellis. We need to learn three things. We need to learn to stop. We need to learn how to listen, to look, and we need to learn how to listen. How's that for a memorable recall? Huh? Easy enough to remember. Stop, look, and listen. And when I speak about stopping, I'm talking about spiritual centering. Okay? It's about pausing and stillness in terms of grounding ourselves and centering ourselves to the real center, who is God. Okay? Which has to do with what? Some practice of meditation. How many of you meditate? How many of you spend like 5-10 minutes just stilling yourself in quiet without having to do anything? Even sometimes in our meditation, we have all sorts of paraphernalia that we latch onto. We crowd it out with all kinds of activities. But what about if we just show up and hang out with God and just enjoy the moment without doing anything? Huh? That's centering. That's being grounded in God and just enjoying God's presence. How many of you practice centering prayer? Okay, or some kind of meditation. And the goal is really to put yourself in a screeching halt where you can just quiet your heart, remove the static that crowd your thinking and preoccupy your mind. Nouwen says that we hardly have space or margins or spiritual margins in our lives. You know why? Because our spaces are so preoccupied and occupied. That's why we cannot hear anything else. We cannot receive because our spaces are too cluttered. Okay? So we need centering. We need to stop. We need to pause. The second one is looking, which has to do with doing spiritual inventory. Later on, I'll teach you how to do a spiritual inventory. Spiritual inventory where you what? kind of like look back to what has been happening in your life, the past day, the past year, or whatever. It's like, I like how one Jesuit priest puts it, you rummage through your day. You inventory what goes on so that in order that for you to keep short accounts with God. Most of us, we enter into, by the way, I always joke about this too. When you're in a state of confusion, then you have a newfound religion. It's Confucianism. And most people get confused, thoroughly confused, and they don't even know how to get their bearings back because they have allowed what? Things to pile up and pile up and pile up without what? Inventorying what's going on. And looking or doing inventory is one way of actually keeping track of our journey. And we do that by doing the examine. Okay? So spiritual meditation or centering, you do like centering prayer or some form of meditation, whereas doing inventory, you do some kind of an examination of consciousness or conscience. I'll teach you how to do that in a while, later on. And thirdly, we listen. And listen has to do with spiritual reading. And this has to do with the practice of Lectio Divina. Are you with me? Or are you practicing Napsio Divina right now? Which is one of my favorite practices too. Divine siesta. Divine napping. Okay, so stop, look, listen. I believe that if we only can cultivate this most deeply, they serve as foundation to whatever else we do, even as we think about organizing or structuring our lives through some kind of a rule of life. Okay? Now, before I talk about another foundational preparation, because the stop, look, and listen can actually be kind of like amalgamated into one particular practice that I'm going to introduce to you right after the break. How's that? So let's take about 9 minutes and a half. No, 10 minutes. And, roam around like a dinosaur and come back here on Earth after a while. And I'll see you. Brethren, sister, gather ye. Okay, some of our friends are going to be passing out a couple of handouts right now called the Grand Examen. Make sure that you get one of those right there. Okay. And while they're passing, while they're passing them out, let me explain what we're going to do here. Hello? Okay. What I'm going to introduce you to really encompasses all three of the ones that I've talked about. Stop, look, and listen. But it's under what I would term as the Grand Examen. I say grand because what I want you to do is to look back to the last 6 months to a year. Probably no more than a year, okay? And kind of like inventory what your journey has been like. Let me explain it to you as soon as you get your copies. But how many of you are like what I would call mallers? I mean, like you like malls. You like shopping, or even if it's just window shopping. Oh, rich, huh? Okay. Now, instinctively, let me ask you, when you visit a newly opened mall, a huge mall, instinctively, where do you go first? As soon as you enter the mall. What are you looking for? What? Oh my goodness. Now I'm getting hungry. Okay. Normally you look for what? The directory. You know why? Because you're looking for the red dot that tells you You are here. Why do you want to need to know where you're at? So that you can what? Get a good bearing on where you're at, so you know where to go, and that becomes your reference point. In many ways, the Grand Examen is largely that as well. Does everybody have your sheet now? Okay. Let me walk you through this, because I'm going to ask you to do this in the next few minutes. So, this is a spiritual journey inventory wherein one examines his or her current reality, your journey reality, utilizing one's contemplative awareness that involves 4 specific thrusts. Okay? None of us can ever really craft a good, relevant rule of life unless we know, first of all, where are we? Where are we coming from, and where are we headed? Does that make sense? So it becomes very foundational, necessary aspect of our crafting the rule of life. Let's start. It involves 4 thrusts. First is what? A looking back. So we look back in retrospect. Using the power of memory, one retrospectively reviews the past 6 months to a year or so, and deliberately exercises what I would call the discipline of noticing. Okay? When you look back to your past 6 months to a year, I don't want you to jump into the interpretive process. All I want you to do is identify for me, for our purposes, identify for me at least 2 or 3 landmark events, or pivotal points, or turning points that have been most impactful for you. Okay, of all the many things that have transpired in your life over the last 6 months to a year, if you were to identify 2 or 3 events, what are they? Maybe a loved one died. Maybe you moved to another state. Do not do any kind of interpretive work. I want you to just tell it like it is. Does that make sense? Just write it down and identify them. 2 or 3 pivotal points, landmark events, turning points, etc. Secondly, after you look back and you've jotted down 2 or 3 of those events in your journey that have made a great deal of difference in your life, you look through. Okay? So, you look back and then you look through. Looking through, dependent upon the mind of Christ, you now try and discern certain apparent connections and deeper meaning in one's experiences. In other words, we are assuming here that nothing happens randomly, which means we can actually make certain connections. Okay? That God is a God of providence. Okay? That there is some form of synchronicity that happens in our lives if we but pay attention to it. So what are we looking for? We're looking for themes and patterns. Now, do not force it, okay? It may not seem obvious right now, and if it doesn't become very apparent, it's okay, relax. Maybe it'll make more sense later on. And that's okay. Don't force anything just so you can make connections. But if you just pause for a while, chances are you will see some discernible patterns. For example, say a loved one, and this is just arbitrary example, a loved one died, and then you move to another state. A common pattern probably will be, wow, I really have a hard time adjusting to sudden interruptions in my life. It throws me off. Okay? I get disoriented so easily, and I can't handle my emotions. So that's kind of like, as you looking through means what? You go interiorly, you go a little bit more introspective. Okay? You're now kind of interpreting the events that you've identified, and you're making sense of them. So you're saying, oh, wow, moving, the dying, I can't adjust, I have a hard time dealing with my emotions, something like that. And then thirdly, a looking forward, relying on sanctified imagination, one envisions future direction, which is to say what and where God is calling you or summoning you or leading you. I'm not talking about a job prospect here or a career move, even though it may involve that, but it's more like, in light of what I've identified as I look back, in light of the patterns or the themes or commonalities I've seen, what sense do I have that God may be inviting me to go this route or prompting me to go this way? Does that make sense? Or maybe opening up an opportunity for me to do something like maybe engaging in some spiritual practice of like maybe even seeing a spiritual director or a therapist or what have you, in light of what you have discovered. So it can take the form of what you need to do, where you might be led, a certain direction you may be wanting to take, a practice that you may want to engage in, or whatever, okay? So, lastly, so we've looked back, we've looked through, and then we look forward, and then the last one is looking around. And this is what pertains to the rule of life, because drawing upon the resources of community, the gift of one anothering. In the scripture, we're told, love one another, be of the same mind with one another, admonish one another, rebuke one another, correct one another, etc., etc. Drawing upon the resources of whatever community you're involved in, and in this case, New Life Fellowship or some other community, on top of this, then you determine your needed support or trellis, your accountability structure, okay, to press on toward the future. In other words, you've identified, when you look back, you've identified 2 or 3 pivotal events. You've looked through and you saw the patterns or some commonalities or common threads and what you may be called to do. You've looked forward and you have a better sense of, oh, I think that God is showing me this route or this path to take or this new practice to indulge in or engage in. And how do I sustain it? How do I ensure that what I'm looking forward to actually happens? What is my sort of like preliminary spiritual trellis? What is my structure, my present structure, my accountability support, my community support, etc., etc.? Are we on the same page? Do you have any questions before I actually ask you to do this? As clear as mud? You know what to do? Okay, what I want you to do is spend maybe a minute or so just to let this sink in silence, where you're at, where you're seated. And after a minute or so, when you feel ready, then start working on your worksheet. You'll realize that on the back, there is a worksheet. Now, Rich will collect this and grade this. No, I'm kidding. He's not going to collect and eavesdrop on it. It's yours to keep and all that. But this is where you're going to write it down. Now, do not be overly ambitious for this next 10, 15 minutes of exercise. Just jot down keywords that will prompt you. You can fine-tune it later on and you can journal more about it. But let's just start the exercise going, okay? So let's maintain a disciplined time of silence as we do this. And as we work on our grand examen, let's pray that God would reveal to us things that we need to know as we look back, things that we need to notice and make sense of as we look through, things that we can look forward to, okay, that we may engage in the future, and as we look around, resources that we can draw upon, okay? And I will time you in just a while, but right now, let's usher ourselves into a moment of silence, and then I would invite you to dive into the exercise itself. You may want to begin now, just looking back. Don't be too ambitious. Just identify 2 or 3 turning points for the last 6 months to a year. Now start making sense of them, coherent sense. Are there any connectedness, like commonalities or common threads about the 2 or 3 experiences I've been able to identify? What emerges out of your reflection as an overarching theme or pattern? So now as you look toward the future, what is it that you can envision? as God's calling or summons or leading for you? What and where are you being led? What do you envision doing as a result of your looking back and your looking through? In other words, what are you looking forward to? So lastly is, as you look around, how would you seek to ensure that all this would come to fruition? What you're looking forward to can actually take shape. What support system do you have or structure? Maybe some accountability measure, reinforcement from the community. You don't have to perfect it right now. And you can always fine-tune it later on and add some more elements to it. But I just want you to get a sense and a feel of what's it like to do something like this. So right now, I want you to grab a partner, somebody that's sitting right next to you, and as you are comfortable, share with one another what you've come up with. Maybe one highlight of your looking back, and then how you're looking through, and how you're, moving forward and looking around. Why don't you do that right now? Just grab a partner. I mean, don't literally grab them, but just choose somebody. If you don't have a dyad, triads would be okay too, so no problem. You can start wrapping it up a little bit, and then give the chance to the other person, your partner, to have the other person's turn.
through the whole thing? Just the first one?
The whole thing.
The whole thing?
Oops. It's okay. Folks, can I have your attention? Hello? I hate to cut you off. I know that you're warming up already and all that, but hopefully this has just given you a taste of what you can do, on your own, some more. But let me hear from maybe some of you. What was the process like for you? What did it do to you as you inventory your journey? Anyone? What was the process like for you as you sort of like had the opportunity maybe for the first time to look back and look through and go ahead?
I had thought about these connections, but doing that made it way clearer how in this past 6 months exactly, God has been putting things together that are completely connected towards what I see in the looking forward.
Thank you. You'll share that to me later, right? No. Yeah.
Doing this exercise, what I realized, it helped me to become aware of the pattern. Just going back to different situations that it took place a year ago, 6 months ago, and the way I responded to the situation. So I was just like, wow, there is a pattern. My feelings, my behavior, and what is leading me to do, and to the whole thing is like what is really God is calling me to do. So it's an amazing awareness.
Thank you.
Hi. So I feel like this is very difficult because it forces me to kind of stop and look, just really stop and study the reactions to things that happen in life. And then for me, it was really difficult the looking around. I almost couldn't come up with anything. So I don't know. That was my impression.
Thank you. Well, at least not yet, huh?
arm. So they had to remove that. He's out in California now. He had just graduated from college, and he got this pain in his arm because he was learning how to break dance. And I said, run and go get an x-ray done and see, maybe you broke it, maybe you got a stress fracture. It was a tumor. It was a giant cell tumor. Oh, my goodness. It could be cancerous. Oh, my goodness. We went through so much, and they took it out, and they didn't even know if they were going to have to cut off his wrist or anything. And when they came out to tell me, okay, we took it out, we didn't have to remove his wrist, it could be cancerous. Do you know that I felt myself falling back, and I felt the Lord's hand holding me up, which is the only reason why I didn't hit the floor. 2 weeks of horrible pain and crying and praying to God and everything was not cancerous. Thank you, Jesus. Not cancerous. So they have to keep on doing, every 3 months they do the x-ray. Don't you know that thing came back? It came back. It is the same thing. They operated on him this past Christmas. I went out to California to be with him. Do you know that this time, because I've been going to church and studying and being into the Word, and when I found out that he had it again, this time I felt an actual peace. And I'm like, I'm not worried. Gagi, we call him, his name is Gabriel, going, Gagi, don't be worried, Gagi. He's like, I'm not worried, Mom. He's like, you're not worried, and I'm not worried. He's like, it must be God. I'm like, it is God. I said, he caught me the first time. I said, I'm not worried this time at all. They sat there, they did the operation again. It wasn't cancerous. And that's like the peace that I got from that is the peace that I want other people to feel, to know, which is why I want to be able to start like a small group, do something. I have to be able to let people know that the love of God is there for you. You won't be alone. You won't be afraid. That peace, that love, and that joy, everyone needs to feel it, including all these people who say they don't believe in God and they don't believe in anything. I want to be able to spread that love and that joy because it is there. He is there.
Thank you for sharing that. Right there.
When we started the exercise, I got a little anxious just because I didn't know what I was going to discover. But then I felt that it freed me because of the events that had happened in a year or 6 months. I was able to understand them, like see a light, see something come out of them, speak to me. So this exercise was very freeing to me after the initial, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to think about this.
Thank you. You know, there's really no magic in the exercise at all, but the moment we really take the time to do this kind of inventory, you'll never know what God may reveal that you've never just paid attention to. So I would encourage you, I do this, by the way, and I'm serious, I do this every year. At the end of the year, usually at the end of December, after Christmas or first week of January, I do my own grand examine. And I review what has taken place. And it's a good habit. That's why I call it grand, because at least it encompasses a whole year, you know. But I'm introducing this exercise for you not to add to your tons of other materials that you've probably accumulated over the years, but for you to really start into the habit of regularly inventorying your current reality. But also, I use this because I feel like, how could you possibly even come up with a workable, doable rule of life unless, first of all, you've inventoried where you've come from, where you're at right now, and where you sense you're headed, and how your rule of life can even work. Does that make sense? So we're going to jump into the next one. Can we pass the other handout? And I'm sorry that in the interest of time, we won't have a lot of time to work on this, but I still would like you to give it a try for us to go through it one by one and at least come up with something that you will come away with, okay? It's called Creating a Wisdom Trellis, and it's not original with me. I actually am borrowing it from Elizabeth Canham, who wrote the book Heart Whispers. She's a Benedictine Oblate as well. She was one of my instructors when I went through the Upper Room Academy for Spiritual Formation for 2 years. And this has tremendously helped me, even as a Benedictine Oblate. And you don't have to be a Benedictine Oblate or anything of that sort, even to live a monastic life, to follow some of this monastic wisdom. So, I'm sure you have attempted, many of you probably have attempted to craft a rule of life following. There's a number of resources that you can avail. And so, what I want you to do is to incorporate some of these elements that speak of harmony and balance and all that, which is characteristic of Benedictine spirituality. Let me walk you through this one by one. Just again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to highlight a few things here. So these are what I would call themes of Benedictine spirituality. Does everybody have a copy? Okay, let's start with stability. Stabilistas is actually the one of the major themes of monasticism. Okay, stabilista. They stick with the community and they die with the community, and they really are loyal to the community. Consider how God is calling you to a regular life of prayer, worship, study, and service. If you already have such a routine, ask yourself whether what you have or what you're currently engaging in is life-giving. And the question I want you to ask yourself, which I actually want you to answer in just a while when I prompt you, would be, are you being invited into some specific place where stability needs to replace escape? Ponder on that. Are you being invited to some specific place where stability needs to replace any kind of form of escape? Because sometimes, we have itching feet. When things go rough and tough, we don't stick it out. We don't have stickability anymore. We just jump into the next thing, okay, that can alleviate our current situation, which is honestly, in many ways, is a form of what? Escape, right? Second is conversion. God calls us to an ongoing process of conversion or transformation. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how will you attend to the inner rhythms of your days and life in order to seek freedom from encumberment by things that limit encounter with God? Specifically, and this is the bottom line, where will you simplify your life? What are areas in your life that actually hinder your own ongoing transformation? In other words, baggages, encumberments, what are the weights you carry that slow you down? You may want to identify them, and what are you trying to do to sort of like lighten the load or press on without allowing those encumberments to get the better of you. Thirdly, is the whole issue of obedience. Listening deeply to God through scripture, nature, and experience leads to clarity about how to be faithful in discipleship. And the question we need to ask ourselves is this: what disciplines will you adopt in order to hear and do God's will? Sometimes God's will is so glaring, it's right it's right in front of us, but we still miss it because we don't pay attention, or we don't engage, or we don't provide a freer space for us to be able to even pin it down or identify so that we can obey what God is calling us to do. Next is recreation. The joyful celebration of God's ever-creating activity in our lives is sometimes forgotten in the pursuit of success and achievement. The question we need to ask ourselves would be, how will you commit to the renewal of body? That's why it's called recreation. How will you commit to the renewal of body, mind, and spirit through what? Play, humor, focused energy, and rest. So you may want to underline those key words. Do you play? Do you celebrate life and enjoy it? I mean, Ecclesiastes, by the way, is not pessimistic. It really is about celebrating life and seizing the moment. You know, it's just so unfortunate that NIV mistranslates it. The word hebel there is really about the fact that life is fleeting. It's not meaningless. So enjoy it while it lasts, is what I'm saying. What do you do through play, humor, focus, energy, and rest? What concrete, tangible things can you do? Next, the question of stewardship. In order to be grounded in a sense of abundance and grace, we need a commitment to stewardship of the resources entrusted to us. What's the question? How will you support the work of God in the world through faithful management of time, money, talents, and care for God's creation? Lastly is action. Spirituality is more than personal growth in prayer. As you participate in God's passion for the world, ask yourself this one question: how will you engage in service, social justice, peacemaking, and prophetic action? Now, this sounds like big words, but you know, the way they're phrased forces you to really ponder deeply what's entailed, what's involved. Now, again, we don't have the luxury of time right now, but in the quiet of your heart right now, I'm going to go through this with you one by one. And if it's only one thing that you can jot down, do so that as you come away from here, you can continue doing this, but at least you've started the ball rolling for you. And then you can start incorporating it to whatever rule of life you've already kind of started working on. Because these are mere principles, okay, that you can easily incorporate, okay? So, if you look at the second page, it just focuses on the questions. And all I'm asking right now, in the interest of time, is that just think of one thing. Now, do not philosophize. What I want you to do is, you have to concretize it the best way you know how, which means think of something practical, doable, measurable. In other words, something really, really tangible and concrete. Okay? Are we on the same page? All right, let's do it. And I'll time you because I will walk you through the process so that at least we're all kind of pacing ourselves accordingly. Let's start with the first one, stability. The question is, are you being invited into some specific place where stability needs to replace escape? Think about it for a moment. Write down your thoughts. Maybe God wants you to stick around in terms of employment, even though the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Yes.
Other examples.
Oh, sure. I mean, give me other examples that you can think of. something that pops into your mind about a sense of stability that God may be prompting you. Yeah, please. What? Yeah, as simple as that. She says stay at home more. You know? Yeah.
Reducing anger.
Reducing anger. Say more.
I see it all the time with myself. I've reduced my anger in driving. A lot. That's one thing. Maybe in my relationships with people too. I have some deep anxieties about certain people.
Yeah.
When I are confronting them, I have to sit back.
Yeah. Thank you. When I speak about a form of escape, is the temptation for us to just, sometimes we're too eager and too quick to make decisions that is what? That are for our comfort. We don't have perseverance. We don't have a sense of, again, sticking it out. That attitude of, okay, even though it may be hard and all that, I think that God is calling me to what? Stay put. Or God is calling me to patiently wade myself through this particular situation, regardless. Or stay with my parents. God forbid, no. My two sons, my wife and I were kind of like close to this, part where we wanted to rejoice that we're going to be empty nesters. And lo and behold, our two boys decided to come back and reclaim their territory. In fact, my youngest son booted me out. And I said, okay, but pay me rent. And he did, no. It's true. But going the second one, conversion. How will you attend to the inner rhythms of your days and life in order to seek freedom from encumberment by things that limit encounter with God? So again, the bottom line question we're trying to respond to is, where will you simplify your life? How would you declutter your existence right now? What are you giving up? What are you surrendering? What are you letting go? What distances you from God? What are the statics in your life that you can get rid of so that you can refocus? That will aid in your continuing inner transformation. Think about it. Just think of one right now. So don't, just so you have something to start with. What are you latching on that slows you down? What kind of fat can you trim off? Third, obedience. What practices, exercises, or disciplines will you adopt in order to hear and do God's will? What would pave the way for you to actually respond and yield to God's desire for you? What disciplines will you cultivate so that it will reinforce your sense of following God more obediently?
Give us some of these prime the pump for us. Just give us examples of those disciplines.
One that comes to mind, you have to forgive me because it really is the one thing that's uppermost in my mind, is like doing a daily examine. I'm not talking about the grand examine, but how would you like to end your day just reviewing your day? so that you can hear God better lead you. You know, if you do that like every day, you probably will really hear the voice of God. The problem, the reason why we cannot hear is because there's no space for hearing. Our lives are just so cluttered. If you pause and deliberately engage into a practice of examine, how many of you do that? You know, like the daily examine? I would like to challenge you to do that 5 minutes or 10 minutes before you retire to bed. Provide closure to your day and listen. Another practice, of course, is what? The practice of slow reading of devotional, prayerful reading of Scripture called Lectio. You know? That's when you listen to how God is speaking to you. By not being in a hurry. By not reading your Bible in 1 week. Or 1 year. Nothing against that. But engage in a more formational reading of the Bible by not hurrying, by slowing down deliberately. Don't chew on like 3 chapters. Chew on a verse. And then listen. Okay? 4th, recreation. I need this, by the way. How will you commit to the renewal of body, mind, and spirit through play, humor, focused energy, and rest? Now, I'm staying with my nephew who happens to have a treadmill, and everybody's going on a treadmill, and I go, oh my gosh, you know, maybe I should do that. And for the last several days now, hey, I started with losing 100 calories and 200, and today, at 11 o'clock in the morning, I lost 350 calories by being on the treadmill for 35 minutes. And it felt so good to just perspire. And then I ate my lunch and consumed 500 calories. No. No, but what do you do for a hobby that you enjoy, that God takes pleasure on? When you do that, you feel like, wow, God is delighting, you know, in your art, in your craft. What do you do to sort of like celebrate life and lighten the load of your existence, you know? And do you rest? What do you do when you rest? Stewardship. How will you support the work of God in the world through faithful management of time, money, talents, and care for God's creation? Can you think of something concrete about that? Where you know you're actually contributing to something that has some eternal consequences? Anyone who can come up with something that you know you're making a dent in the world? Yeah. Supporting missions. Sure, of course. Yeah. How so? Okay. Yeah. I mean, Rich was just telling me about your food pantry. In my church, we have a food pantry, but nothing like what you've got. You know, in terms of, my gosh, you know, sometimes we take that for granted because we're so accustomed to doing it and seeing it. But we never know, my gosh, what it really is doing for other people. Yes, somebody raised her hand right there. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. You forgot. And the last one, action, is how will you engage in service, social justice, peacemaking, and prophetic action? Okay, I'll give you a few more minutes, and then I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I'll call out, not I'll call out, but I'll ask for volunteer. If there's no volunteer, then I'll volunteer you. I'll ask one example, one or two examples of each, that maybe it will stir up something in us as we hear people share what they've come up with, okay? Just to get us started with this. But let me just give you a little bit more time, just to kind of like wrap things up a little bit. Let's hear some of your ideas. Just share them where you're at, okay? Just give us some of those ideas that can motivate us or inspire us. The first one, stability. Are you being invited into some specific place where stability needs to replace escape? Thoughts? Examples? Come on. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Instead of just being able to sit and listen and be with Christ and receive like how He wants to help me in the middle of that complex task.
Okay. So exercising patience and perseverance to actually attend to it and work through it. Thank you. Yeah.
I guess for me, it's accepting being a stay-at-home mom,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
like not fighting it, like, just like not grumbling at the end of the day because I had a long day, but accepting it and embracing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And flourishing in it, huh? Not enduring it, huh? Yeah. Good. Anyone else? Yeah. Going to bed early. Yes.
I'm actually more of a night owl, but I find that I can more easily live in rhythm if I go to sleep early.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly know why that is the way it is, but it's helped me be more balanced, even emotionally. So
Yeah.
that's that.
Yeah, as simple as that, but it's so tangible that sometimes we forget about that actually it does reinforce a sense of stability in us, huh? We really take for granted our bodies too, so. Yeah, one right there.
I think I'm piggybacking on what Nellie over there shared about stability and being a stay-at-home mom. For multiple facets of our families, how our family runs, and as well as my own soul care, I guess, I should be home longer, and I can embrace it. But then when I look at the definition of stability, I know that in other areas, namely financial, I want to embrace stability, but I don't know, I'm not sure God's leading. So I just had a question about that. Like, just the feeling I get is the season will continue. I'm at home with my kids and I would love it if I didn't have this nagging financial pressure that I might be, it's reality,
Yeah, it's so real. Hold on to that. We will have some room for Q&A because Rich has all the answers in the world. And me, I can only quote Rainier Maria Rilke, who famously said, "Learn to live with the questions." Okay, the second one. Oh, please, go ahead.
I was just thinking as we've done these, that discipline keeps screaming at me. And I feel like I'm in a spiritual kindergarten because I pray, I meditate, I stop. I do Sabbath once in a while. So all of those, once in a while. So discipline. And tomorrow I'm going to punch out for 5 minutes at noon and pray, take a walk. So that's what I'm being called to do, to examine discipline. And when the doctor said a month ago that I had diabetes, for a week I whined. And then it's absurd to me now that I would even think about having a soda, but not all foods yet.
Yeah.
So discipline has been screaming through all of what we've talked about, spiritual kindergarten.
Bless you. Well, the second one, conversion. How will you simplify, or where will you simplify your life? Yeah.
I mean, I've written, if I do not go back home and open my email or open my work laptop and check what I'm not supposed to check, even after work.
Thank you. There's another one right there.
I find that I overschedule things with friends, even if it's social. And by the end of the week, I feel exhausted. So I think just the freedom of being okay with having nothing to do.
Sure.
I'd say social media for me on my phone. I go through stretches where I'm like on Instagram and I'll refresh the page after I just refreshed it. And when I start doing that, I usually go through like 7 days or 30 days without social media, and like I feel that I'm most connected to God. But then I have a platform through Instagram and Facebook to, impact and like, really speak into people's life. But social media for me is a struggle at times.
Thank you. Hey, there's a brave soul out here who would invoke that magic word. Thank you. Yeah.
In the last year, I've gone through some experiences with my children where I have to step back and not talk at them so much and just let them find their way. And it simplified my life to an extent because, obviously I still worry. But now that I have greater faith, growing faith, and instead of talking at them, spend a lot of that time talking to God.
Yeah.
And asking Him to give them revelation, discernment, to guide them. I feel like my life is much more simplified.
Thank you. Can you imagine how a huge load gets off your back, huh? When we start stopping to be God and just let go. I'm sorry, I have to invoke my patron saint here, but one way to simplify our lives sometimes is to engage in what Nauen calls the ministry of absence. Sometimes we just need to disappear and be unavailable because as ministers, we're overly available. He calls it the ministry of absence. That's how you simplify your life. Just evaporate. Because why? Like what she said, you know what she said? Well, then I can pray to God. I can be present to God on behalf of the people I'm absent from. I don't have to do it all, So that's good.
Hey, Will, if I can call an audible here. I'm a big football fan. Let me just call an audible because we have about 15 minutes. And so what I'd like to do for the rest of our time is just to take a couple of questions, get very practical here.
Sure.
And so what we're doing here, just at New Life, we talk a lot about the rule of life. And so if you've been to Communitas, you've taken the rule of life. And the rule, it's an intentional framework for the purpose of Christ being formed in us. And that's what it's about here. And so I want to get just very practical here, and I just want to take a few questions out here for next steps. Like, where do we go from here? Let me ask the first question, and then for those of you that we'll just keep it as succinct as possible, and give Will an opportunity to respond to it. But I just want to get very practical in the last 15 minutes as we move out here. So Will, as a next step, we have all this before us. I found the Grand Examen to be very helpful in terms of the season that I'm in right now and what I need to be focusing on in my role. But what is, for all of us in this room and at different places in our journey, what's just a good next step? We leave here, what do we do with this? What's a good next step for us?
I really would like to encourage you to just go through the questions again, and start really filling that out. I mean, with quote-unquote responses based on your reflection. Again, I don't want you to treat it as like you're filling in the blanks. Do it for yourself by pondering and taking the time to really think through what are some concrete things I can do. Now, as to how you would structure your rule of life, I don't think that I would imagine that right by now you have some structure you're following. It's just a matter of like incorporating it. If you want, you can use the trellis itself as your structure, but you don't have to. In other words, if there is something that you are currently already using, just incorporate some of these thoughts together. And that's how you concretize it. But I think the tendency for us sometimes is just do the shortcut thing. My encouragement for you is, why don't you take some time, maybe a few hours or maybe half a day, and just think through this and really prayerfully answer and fill it out. You probably would get the surprise of your life that you'll come up with some insights and some things that you really, really can practically do that you've never thought about, that you can really incorporate in your daily rhythm. So
at New Life, we have a framework, as you can see right here, our rule of life of prayer, rest, relationships, and work. And so if you're trying to figure out a way to organize your rule, that's the way that we teach it here. Prayer, which is, devotions to God, scripture, rest, really self-care, relationships, obviously, and work. And so that's just one template, one of many templates that we could use. Any other questions out there? Just questions like next steps, practical, anything that you guys are holding. Like, Jihi, you had a question. I don't think Will responded to it. But Do you recall her question? I just didn't want to leave her hanging out there.
Well, her question really is, it's a tension between, trying to like stay at home and at the same time acquire financial stability. Am I getting it right and all that? Honestly, I can concoct something right now. I don't know how to answer that. I wish I had a formula that I can tell you, but it really is one of those tensional realities you just have to grapple with. And I don't know enough of your situation or context to be able to actually even answer that right now. It's just a complex thing, and I just want to encourage you even for bringing that up, but it probably take a much longer time to really arrest the issue. So I'm just being very honest about it. It's not a cop-out or anything, but...
Are you escaping on us, Will?
What's that?
You're escaping on us?
By the way, something else came into my mind when you were saying something earlier, Rich. It might help if you have like an accountability partner. I don't want to use the word accountability because it conjures up all kinds of negative images. But it does help when you have a trusted friend and say, you know what, this is what I'm committing to do with my rule of life. Can I give you permission to check up on me like every quarter, or at the end of the year and see how well I'm doing and whether, it does help, folks. If you have a trusted friend like that you can make yourself kind of like answerable.
Others? Julie in the back?
Between 1 and 2, stability and conversion, are they sort of like opposite ends of the spectrum, simplifying as in cutting out and stability sort of staying? I mean, could it be possible that in one season you would want to cut it out, but in another season you want to stay? Is that?
Great question. Yeah. In many ways, we do have to take into account what season of life we're in. And so you can emphasize one over the other. So it is sometimes a matter of what are we being called to do at this present moment too. That's why I don't know if you caught it earlier, I'm not a huge believer of a hierarchical structure. I really believe in a more elastic way of looking at things so that we don't overburden ourselves unnecessarily. I don't know who invented that, honestly, but something in me resists the very idea that things are like neat and tidy and orderly like that, when life is quite the contrary. You know that. Those of you who are young mothers who are caring for toddlers and all that, you are so guilt-stricken that you're not able to do a one-day retreat, or you don't have the luxury of doing ministry and all that. Folks, forget it. I mean, it's like, that's just the way it is. You're in a stage of life right now where you're focusing on something else. It's just that you need just to recalibrate your perspective, and you need just to reframe things in a much better light so that you don't unnecessarily wallow in guilt. Does that make sense?
Will, just in terms, I'm a perfectionist, and so I see all these 6 things, and when I create my rule, I want to do all 6. But I realize that in the season that I'm in,
yes,
really I'm being invited to 1 or 2 aspects of it. Is that something you recommend? Like what, maybe there's 1 or 2, are there all 6 when we walk out of here? What would you say to that?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the 6 gives you kind of like a good overview framework and see where you may potentially be imbalanced. So it's kind of like serves as a yardstick or a check. But at the same time, I would free myself up again from the guilt of, oh, I didn't get it covered, But just, even if you like do half of them, or not even half of them, 2 or 3 most important things. See, part of, if you read Marjorie Thompson's Creating a Rule of Life, one of the questions she asks is, what is my need in the moment? That, not just a need, what is the desire that God has implanted in my life right now? So when you respond to those simple questions, then you are able to narrow down some sense of priority and what you need to address and work on. See, sometimes we're so, what's the word? So outcome and so results and so goal-oriented that we want to cover it all. And then congratulate ourselves that we have been able to check off our list, you know? But we end up what? Not really doing justice to what we're aiming at because we're so scattered. You know, we're spreading ourselves way too thinly and all that. Like, if you ask me, I mean, to be very honest, and I'm not ashamed to even admit this, my wife has been wisely nagging me about it. She says, hey, you need to really, really exercise, you know? And my point is, I don't have time right now. You do, but I don't, and you know, but I know in my heart that's something I need to just do and carve out some time. So I'm actually congratulating myself that while I'm here in New York, I'm exercising. I should call my wife tonight. Yes. Yeah, they're actually also, in a sense, exclusive, but yes. You know, thank you, but I have very little desire to exercise, but because I think more than just beyond just a desire to, and even a longing for that, I really feel like it's not even the right thing to do. It's the most loving thing to do I can do for myself, for my family, and for the ministry. Because the most loving thing to do is always the right thing to do. And that just motivates me and at least fuels some little desire in me.
And it sounds like a great quote. At this season of my life, what is the most loving thing that Jesus is inviting me to do? Which is, Ruth Haley Barton's definition of spiritual formation is being formed into the image of Christ for the glory of God, for the sake of others, and for the abundance of myself. And so, you know, what is the most loving thing that I can do? It's a great question. Two more, and then we're going to wrap up there. Matt?
I would call this uncomfortably introspective. So when and how does that get easier?
Come again, I'm sorry.
This is pretty introspective for me. So when and how does that get easier?
It won't. Each time you delve interiorly, our gut knee-jerk reaction is not go there because it's going to really make us uncomfortable. You know, the inward journey is never a comfortable route, but I really feel very strongly that you don't do the inner journey, you don't do your soul work, and you're not going to be any good for anything in terms of ministry because you can only give something that you possess. You know, you can only be as useful to others ministering if you are really taking care of your own soul. And soul work really needs, I'm not talking about morbid introspection, by the way. Some people get so hung up on that. You know, I'm talking about healthy inventory. You know? Now when it says solitude, when you enter the place of solitude, that's when you meet your demons, your compulsions, your addictions, etc., etc. But now it doesn't stop right there. He says, but when you persist and you don't run away from it, that same place of solitude is when you hear the inner voice of love that calls you, you are my beloved. And that makes a difference because whenever you go interiorly, you will really face the tension of your true self and your many false selves. You better just get used to that because that's the reality. And the tension will just simply mount up. You just can't run away from it. So that's just the way it is.
Sorry, Matt. One more, Kelly.
So, for me, I know there's some things I've been trying to do over the last year or 2 years. Do you find from your experience that there's a length of time in practicing one of these disciplines that makes it so part of our DNA, it doesn't really seem like it's an effort anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that's very relative. And it would vary from person to person, of course. Some people can master something like in 6 months or in a few weeks. Some people would just have to take years. Depends on your, well, a number of variables, your strongholds and your footholds and your makeup and your wiring and all kinds of different things. But the most important thing is to really not give up. The motto of my life is, it's always too soon to quit. Take another minute to hang in there. And you'll realize that, oh, I can actually get over the hump. I can actually do it. Again, to tell you the truth, I'm looking at my treadmill, and I was like, it's 34. I can do another one more minute. Ooh, 200 something calories. What about 5 more? And before I know it, I can actually stretch it. So
You gonna call your wife and let her know after that too?
I know, I really am very proud of myself.
I can see that. For the sake of time, we said 6:30 to 9:30. I want to just respect your time, but let me just end with just a couple of words here about the rule of life, because we've been in this at New Life for many years, and there's 2 extremes about the rule with anything spiritual formation-wise. It's the extreme of perfectionism on one side, and the extreme of shame and guilt on the other. And the gospel really comes at both of them from both ends. Perfectionism says, as a perfectionist myself, I get the rule and I think, finally, I'm doing it. God is more pleased with me. God is happier with me. God loves me. And the gospel says, no, God's been loving you whether you had a rule or you didn't have a rule. And then the other side of it is, I have a rule and I don't live up to it. I say I'm going to do 20 minutes of silence, and I do 2 minutes of silence. And all of a sudden, guilt and shame overtake me as well. And the invitation is for the rule not to be a tool for perfectionism or a tool for shame and guilt. It's really to position us to have our lives oriented for the love of Christ to flow in us and through us more deeply. And so whenever shame comes up and whenever guilt comes up, because we use this as a list of how am I doing with God? And it's helpful to one extent, but it can be very dangerous in another. And the gospel is always reminding us, the inner voice of love is always speaking to us. You are my beloved, whether you get the rule right or whether you don't get it right. It's a tool of formation. It's not the end. The end is union with Jesus. This is a tool towards that end. And so just be aware of that, the perfectionism that creeps up inside of you and the guilt and shame that creeps up inside of you. And the last thing I'll say is this. This Sunday, I'm going to be teaching on the power of community and what the cross does for us. Because the monastic rule comes out of a community. And for us to live this, think we can live this under the illusion of individuality, I can do this by myself, we're going to find ourselves to be truly mistaken. And so we need community. We need people around. I love what Will said at the end. We need other people that we can invite in our lives to say, hey, Matt, can you come check in with me every so often? And that's what we are to be as the church, a community that is growing together. That's why can monks pray 7 times a day? Well, when you have 20 other monks praying with you, it's a lot easier than you doing it alone. And so to be the church, the family of Jesus, means that we need to be rooted deeply into community. And what we did tonight is part of that. We found it much more easier to ask the questions about the past year and be introspective because we did it in the context of community. And this is the kind of environments that we're trying to create at New Life, whether it's in environments like this or in small groups. And so on Sunday, I'm going to unpack it some more. What does it look like for us to live this out as a community, as the family of Jesus? But we cannot do this alone. We will find ourselves in a pit very quickly and very frustrated. And so let's thank Will for just teaching us and leading us tonight. Towards the back there are resources. Please pick up the book. It's on spiritual polarities. Is that what it is, Will? Is that the book?
It's about tension.
It's what, I'm sorry?
I was kidding her. I said it's about tension.
It's about tension, about tensions, which is wonderful. So those are for sale down there. And Tony and Shen, where's Shen? They're going to be leading a small group on like a monastic kind of small monastery. Is it Monasteries of the Heart? And so if you're looking to get involved in community and more towards this end, Tony and Chin, could you guys just stand up so we just get a view of your good-looking selves? And so our monks here, and so just speak to them at the end. They'll be hanging around here just for more information to figure out when they meet and what it's about there. But go get a book, get some coffee in the back, and I just want to end right now. I know you guys have work in the morning, but let me pray for you, and we'll end our time together. And so, and let's just end with about 30 seconds of silence and allow everything that we heard and what God said to us just sink in for a moment. And so let's just pause. Father, thank you for the gift of your presence. Thank you for all the ways that you spoke to us in our reflection, in our introspection, in our contemplation. And Lord, I pray you would give us the strength, the wisdom, the courage to say yes to the ways that you're leading us. Father, may we be a community deeply committed to living in love with you and living out of that place, be an extension of your grace and love to the world around us. And so, Lord, as we go home, may we truly examine our hearts, may examine our ways and the ways that you're leading us today. Thank you for Will, and we pray your blessing on him, that your strength and your grace would rest on him tonight. And so, Lord, we give you praise, we give you honor. We thank you for this time tonight. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.